Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Conversations with My Clients. This episode is actually a bit different because I am not going to talk about a conversation that I have had with one of my clients. Instead, I am recording this podcast on request from somebody that has asked me to talk about the menopause. So this is totally my jam. I have not yet started my menopause transition, but it is a topic that really interests me. Last year, I did a course by Dr. Stacey Sims, who is a bit of an expert on training and nutrition for menopausal athletes. So that was a really fascinating course. And I basically tried to go to as many talks and read as many books as I can on this subject because it is something that is going to impact me and something that will impact a lot of my clients and already has impacted a lot of my clients. So it's a subject that I am mega interested in. So I was really happy to be asked to record an episode about this. So I'm going to try and keep this succinct, but this is probably going to be a little bit longer than my usual 10-minute length podcasts, just because this is such a massive topic. So let's begin. Now, I'm going to start by explaining what actually is the menopause. So the menopause is actually a moment in time that represents 12 months passing since we had our last period. You can also determine this through hormone testings if you don't have periods or don't track your periods, so you won't know if it's been 12 months or not. So the average age of this moment happening is 51 years old. However, it can happen anytime between the ages of 45 and 56 on average. So this is averages that we're talking about here. If you have your menopause moment between the ages of 40 and 45, you are considered to have had an early menopause, but it is possible to have menopause earlier than that. Some people actually have to be put into a medically induced menopause, so that can happen pre then as well. Now, the transition from our reproductive years to that menopause moment is called perimenopause. Now, perimenopause can take up to 10 years, and you can start this process as early as age 36. So on average, most people will start perimenopause between the ages of 36 and 45. And just to round off the timeline, so to speak, you would be considered postmenopausal if you have had that moment in time, that menopause moment, 12 months, no periods. And after that, you are considered postmenopausal. This is your basic biological state for the rest of your life. So we are going to mainly talk a bit about perimenopause today. So this is our transition from when we are having a menstrual cycle, our reproductive years, to going to have no menstrual cycle. So we're talking about hormones and the fluctuation and decline of said hormones. I don't want to get too sciencey, but I will talk about what those hormones are. So we're mainly talking about estrogen and progesterone, but also our follicle stimulating hormone and our luteinizing hormone. So these are our sex hormones that work together to give us our menstrual cycles. But estrogen and progesterone in particular are also heavily involved in many, many different processes in our body, including, but not limited to, our muscle building and also our muscle breakdown, our bone health, our brain health, and also our metabolism. So you can start to understand why fluctuations in our hormone levels cause such big symptoms associated with perimenopause going into menopause. So one of the questions I was asked in particular is, what are the symptoms that we are starting this transition on our way to menopause? And the first one, the big giveaway, is looking for a change in our menstrual cycle. Obviously, I've taught that these are hormones involved in our menstrual cycle. So if these hormones start to go out of whack, we might see changes in our menstrual cycle. Now, this could be in terms of the length of our cycle. It could be in terms of how many days we bleed during our cycle. It can also be how heavy our flow is. So how are we supposed to know if these things change if we don't know what these things are in the first place? It astounds me how many people I know that have menstrual cycles that do not track their cycle. It's so easy to track your cycle these days. You just download an app on your phone and you can tell the app when you have started your bleed, when you have finished. You can even log symptoms in there so you can keep an eye on your PMS symptoms as you go by month. So it couldn't be easier. So if you don't already track your cycle, please do track your cycle, because if you don't know what it is you're dealing with, you don't know whether or not it is changing. I do know that depending on the type of contraception that you are on, you may not have a bleed, but you may still have symptoms of PMS. So it's still worth tracking those anyway, because that's going to give you a rough idea of when your cycle is happening within your body anyway. I think the app that I use is called Period Tracker. So very imaginative title there, but it does exactly what it says on the tin. So changes in your menstrual cycle is clue number one that things might start to be happening in terms of entering that transition period. The big one, and probably the most relevant one to the space that I work in, is changes in our body composition. So I've mentioned how estrogen and progesterone are involved in muscle building, muscle breakdown, our bone mineral density. They are also involved in our fat storage and where we store fat. It's wild. This happens so often when people will say, you know, I'm doing all of the same things that I used to do. I eat well, I exercise, but suddenly I have gained a load of weight around my tummy. So that is classic perimenopause, when you start storing fat in areas that you didn't used to store fat. I mentioned that there is an impact on our bone mineral density and our muscles. So with these changes, you might start to experience muscle aches. You might start to experience joint pain. So things can start to become quite uncomfortable in that respect. I also mentioned earlier that these hormones are involved in our metabolism. So they can make us become insulin resistant, or at least reduce our sensitivity to insulin. So all of these things will also change how and where we store fat as well. So seeing a change in your body composition is a big clue as well. Now, serious one, you might notice changes to your mood. So what happens, again, I don't want to get too sciencey, but estrogen is a hormone that can actually cross our blood-brain barrier. So it can go into your brain and it can act on our neurotransmitters that are responsible for our happy hormones, serotonin. So when we don't have those same levels of estrogen crossing into our brain, that effect is kind of turned down. We don't experience that same happiness that we used to from our serotonin levels. And this can lead to depression. This can lead to anxiety, irritability, changes in your mood, your demeanor. And actually, the person that asked me to record this podcast had said, I've heard that people, leave their marriages when they start to go through the menopause. And, this is true. It's not a given, but, you start to experience all these changes in your mental health and you can't explain it. So how do you explain that to the people around you? They might suddenly view you as being completely irrational, and that can lead to issues. You might feel alone, unloved, plus you're feeling anxious and depressed anyway. So it can be a really tricky time. And like I said, you might be someone that has never suffered from any of these before, and then suddenly you are, and it doesn't make any sense to you. But again, it's down to our hormones and not having that same reaction to our serotonin levels. Not to mention that you can also experience vaginal dryness, and discomfort during sexual intercourse. So those combined with not being the happiest person to be around, you can see why problems might start to form if you don't have good communication in your relationship. So it's not given, but you can see how these things do happen and why people talk about it. I'm aware that this all sounds really shit. Well, don't worry, because you can do something about this. You do not need to suffer this in silence. And I think actually what I've noticed in the world recently is that people are talking a lot more about menopause, perimenopause, the changes that we go through. And I think this is a really good thing because this is a natural thing that happens to us. And it can be surprising and shocking, and you can feel alone, but it's something that a lot of us are going through or will be going through or have gone through. So I feel like there's safety in having these conversations and talking to each other and wanting to understand more, because you don't have to suffer. There are things that you can do to help yourself through this. So first one, medical interventions. So human HRT, hormone replacement therapy. So I like to think of hormone replacement therapy. You know how some people take the contraceptive pill, not for contraceptive birth control reasons, but for managing like bad skin or crazy wild moods associated with PMS. I kind of feel like HRT is that. Obviously it's not birth control, it's not preventing periods because you've stopped having periods or you're going through that process, but it's a way of managing those symptoms. That's how I view it. I am not a doctor, so if this is something that interests you, if you are having horrendous symptoms of perimenopause going into menopause and beyond, go see your doctor. But make sure that they are up to date on the research, because there has in the past, back in the day, been a lot of hype about HRT being dangerous and increasing risk of breast cancer. And I think it came out that actually this was only in a really small population of people. So it's generally deemed safe. But of course, as with any medication, you do need to speak to your doctor and talk to them about whether or not it will work for you or if it's going to be helpful for you. There are other medical interventions. For example, we've just talked about you might find yourself experiencing depression. You can take pills for that. You can take antidepressants, and that might help to control the symptoms that you're experiencing there. From a non-medical standpoint, we do have complementary medicine. So adaptogens are things that have been around for hundreds and thousands of years in things like Chinese medicine. And it's basically botanical tinctures and things that you get from plants that can have an impact on our central nervous system. So depending on your symptom that you are experiencing, because there's tons of symptoms that I haven't mentioned, things like hot flushes, for example. So there are different types of adaptogens that you can take that will help you to manage your symptoms. If that is something that interests you, again, this is a massive topic in and of itself, is that if there's a particular symptom that you are experiencing and you're interested to know what kind of adaptogens you might be able to take to minimize those symptoms, then let me know, reach out, and I'll let you know. Finally, the other thing that we can do for ourselves is good old-fashioned lifestyle change. And this is where people like myself come in handy. So nutrition and exercise can help with your menopause experience. And not just nutrition and exercise, a holistic approach. So things like your sleep, your stress, your hydration, those things as well, but predominantly good nutrition and exercise. So again, you could do literally a whole episode just on going into nutrition and exercise, but instead I'm just going to give some very high level advice. And if it is something that people find interesting, then we can go into a lot more detail around this. But I'm going to give 6 tips for changing your lifestyle through good nutrition and exercise that are going to help you through this menopause transition. Number 1, exercise. Exercise is great. We know this. We love exercise. Exercise is great for thousands of reasons, but specifically in this period of time and with the things that I've just spoken about, Exercise helps with insulin sensitivity. It helps with that process of shuttling that glucose out of the way. So when we're becoming insulin resistant and desensitized, exercise is going to help with that. Also, exercise helps with body composition changes, which we can experience during perimenopause. It also helps with metabolic control. So all of those things that are going to start being affected by that diminishing role of estrogen, we can help to counteract some of that with exercise. Tip number 2, related to exercise, it is specifically resistance train. So I talked about the effect on bone mineral density and muscle loss. Resistance train. Get some stress through your bones. Make them stronger. The stronger they are when you start the process, the better, because that bone mineral density is going to decline. And, that can lead to fractures, falls later on in life, things that we don't want to be dealing with, thank you very much, when we're older. Muscle gaining is going to become harder, not impossible, but harder. And we might see increased muscle loss. So the more muscle mass you can have when you start this process or going through this process, the better. It's never too late to start. But honestly, if you haven't yet got into perimenopause yet, get resistance training. Start lifting weights. Start focusing on building muscle mass. That should be one of your top priorities at this stage. Number 3, ensure you are eating enough protein. I'm obsessed with protein. I talk about protein all the time with my clients, and for good reason. Protein is a fantastic macronutrient that is responsible for everything in our body. When you are going through perimenopause and beyond, into postmenopause, your protein needs increase. You need to eat more protein as we get older, because we need protein to step in and take up the slack on what our hormones used to do for us in terms of muscle building and in terms of minimizing muscle breakdown. So eat your protein. Number 4, eat plenty of fruit, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds. Gut health is really very important during this period. Gut health is actually just important all the time, but it's even more important now. So you want to focus on eating a lot of plant-based, whole foods that are going to contribute to the diversity of your gut bacteria. The more diverse your gut bacteria, the healthier you are deemed to be. So seeing as, again, we're going into a period of time where we are at higher risk of metabolic diseases because of the effect on our metabolism, we want to be doing as much as we can internally to counteract that. So get a really nice, diverse, plant-based diet. I'm not saying you have to go vegan or anything. Add these foods in and your protein, and you'll be grand. Number 5, eat enough of the good stuff. It's really tempting when you start to see your body changing that you might want to really try and restrict what you're eating. But when you are not fueling yourself, you can start to experience hormone suppression. So things won't work in the way that they're supposed to be. If you are already in a period of time where your hormones are not working as they're supposed to be, the last thing you want to do is then make it even harder on the ones that are still there, fighting the good fight. So make sure you're fueling yourself properly. Don't be trying to starve yourself because you see this differing pattern of where you're storing yourself. But that also isn't free reign to just go and stuff your face full of calories. Eat the right stuff. Eat the stuff that I've talked about, the protein, the veggies, the whole grains. Eat that good stuff and fuel your body appropriately. And number 6, my final point, is avoid the things that make you feel shit. So this is very individual to you, but people have reported that there are certain things that might trigger off a set of symptoms. Actually, a symptom I haven't talked about is hot flushes. So some people find that when they drink alcohol or caffeine, that can set off hot flushes. So if you are aware of how a certain thing is making you feel, and if that feeling is shit, then as hard as it might be to say goodbye to your coffee, and I pray, please, that this doesn't happen to me because I love coffee, then unfortunately, do what makes you feel good. Again, totally individual to you, but start to be aware of things that might be triggering you and setting you off into a series of symptoms that you don't really like to deal with. So that is all I'm going to talk about today. High level, what it is, things to look out for, things that you can be doing to help with that process and to help you not suffer from some of these symptoms. A lot of the advice I've just given, those top 6 advice points, are things that actually we should be doing anyway for our good health. But at this stage of our lives, this needs to become the priority. If, like me, you are 40 and know that it's coming, it hasn't happened yet, this is the priority. Going into this in the best place possible is going to really help. And if it started already, don't worry, it's not too late. Get on it now. And if you've gone through menopause, doesn't matter. Get on this stuff anyway, because you need to do everything that you can to keep your health for as long as possible. So hopefully this has been an informative episode, slightly different to the norm. But if you have found it interesting, and if there is a topic that you would like me to talk about, or if anything in here piqued your interest and you want to understand more, for example, how much protein, why, if there are questions that you have, please ask me. I'm more than happy to record another episode in response. But otherwise, have a fantastic day. Bye.